Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch video, and today we're comparing two beautiful Patek Philippe annual calendars. So Patek Philippe has been producing perpetual calendars since 1889. Just after that they started producing wristwatches with perpetual calendars. And Patek Philippe really is extremely famous for perpetual calendars. It's very much in their DNA. If you're looking for a perpetual calendar, then usually you're going to look at a Patek Philippe. But Patek really around the 90s thought to themselves that there was such a huge gap between just a standard date and time only watch versus a perpetual calendar. That huge gap in complication and therefore price was just so huge, they thought they must find a way to create an intermediate complication so that clients could have a watch they could buy in between the date function watch and a perpetual calendar watch. And in 1996 they patented the annual calendar movement, which was their own invention at Patek Philippe. The annual calendar was essentially very similar to a perpetual calendar movement, but had to be adjusted every single year versus the perpetual calendar, which has to be adjusted every 100 or so years. So the first watch to feature this annual calendar movement in 1996 was the 5035, and that featured a day, a date, a month, also a 24-hour hand, and also the standard hour hands, and seconds. Really cool watch that was very, very well received. It was a much better price point, obviously, than a perpetual calendar, as it was just far less complicated. However, kind of ironically, the annual calendar had more parts than a perpetual calendar. One main difference, other than the fact you had to adjust the annual calendar every year versus a perpetual calendar, was the fact that the annual calendar didn't feature a moon phase. And that was kind of a trademark signature look of a perpetual calendar, to have a moon phase. And people actually over the years said to Patek, the clients said that we really missed that look of a moon phase on this watch, even though we know it's not a perpetual calendar. And so Patek listened, and a few years later, 9 years later in fact, in 2005, Patek Philippe released the 5146 reference, which featured a moon phase, and they got rid of the 24-hour hand or marker subdial at 6 o'clock that they had featured on the previous model, which was the 5035. Skipping a few years now on to 2010, we saw the release of the 5205 that we're looking at here today. A really beautiful watch that was initially released only in white gold with a light grey and a dark grey dial. A few years after that, we saw the release of the other watch that we're looking at, which is the 5396 in 2016, which marked the 20th anniversary of the annual calendar. And both of these feature a blue dial, slightly different tones of blue dials. The 5396 variation that we're looking at was released in 2017, this specific dial, and the 5205G with the blue dial that we're looking at here was released last year at Basel 2018. Okay, so that's the history of the two watches. Let's have a look now and compare the two pieces and see which one you might prefer. So we're going to start with the clasp on both of these watches. This is a little bit unfair. I'm going to show you two of the clasps that you can get for both of these watches. So the clasp on the rose gold watch, which is our 5396, is a deployant clasp. It's the Calatrava cross deployant clasp, which is an upgraded option that you can buy from Patek Philippe when you order the watch. The other watch we're looking at, the 5205, features the standard tang buckle, which is in high mirror polish in white gold on this example. You can have both clasps on either watch, it doesn't make a difference. You just spec it when you order the watch. You just specify which buckle you'd like to have on your watch. Both are finished absolutely beautifully. It just depends on what you prefer. Personally, I much prefer the tang buckle. It is much less money as well, so you're saving yourself some money there, and it actually protrudes a lot less than the deployant buckle does. The deployant actually sits quite far out from your wrist, and it doesn't look that bad. It really depends. A lot of people absolutely love seeing that Calatrava cross, but personally it doesn't really bother me too much. Next, moving on to the straps on these watches. The straps are very similar. We've got this kind of gloss finish alligator strap on both watches. The 5396 features a deep navy strap, whereas the 5205 features a black alligator strap. Both are absolutely beautiful. Patek Philippe straps are stunning always. The quality is always amazing in them. They're not too thick as well, which makes them extremely comfortable. Next, moving on to our cases on these two watches. I'm going to start with the case backs on both these watches. They feature obviously a very similar movement, and they are both finished to the incredible levels that Patek Philippe always finishes every movement to. And they both feature their own Patek Philippe seals, which means that everything on that watch internally and externally is finished to the highest level. An example I always talk about is the level of the screws, that every single screw, no matter the size, is hand polished and finished to the highest level with a beautiful mirror finish, including the actual slots that the screws go into are hand finished and polished as well. Incredible finishing. No really other brand does it quite to the level that Patek Philippe does it, and that's partly why you pay the extra price for a Patek Philippe, is that there are not many watchmakers out there in the world that can finish a watch to this level. Incredibly skilled level of craftsmanship, and it's an honor to own one of these watches purely because of that. Next, moving up onto the actual case. Now, the cases between these two watches are totally different. Something that might confuse you though, as you look at these two watches side by side, is the fact that the 5205 is in fact a 40mm case size, whereas the 5396 is actually a 38.5mm case size or diameter, whereas the 5396 wears way larger than that. And maybe the 5205 wears slightly smaller, like a 39mm or 38mm. Both are absolutely beautiful cases in their own right though, and they are totally different. The kind of distracting thing here is that they are in different colored metals, but we're going to use that and talk about that later on. So we're going to start with the 5205. The case on the 5205 is an absolute work of art. It is totally unique, totally incredible. The scooped out sides of the watch are stunning. You're not going to see any watch like this. They are so beautiful. The design on this watch is unreal. I mean, it's so creative from Patek Philippe. Most dress watches look very, very similar, so for them to be able to create something totally unique and new like this is just wonderful. It's also a very classic looking watch, even though it does feature these amazing modern design cues. My favorite thing is the fact it is really rounded and kind of almost bulbous in a way. I love the fact it's got that concave bezel on this piece. It just looks so beautiful. The way the light moves on this watch is stunning. And the domed sapphire crystal really adds to that whole smooth, rounded effect of this watch. A very, very classic, elegant looking piece with that modern twist of those scooped out lugs. And you can see straight through these lugs as well. They're like a skeletonized effect. Really, really beautiful case. Definitely by far one of my favorites in the Patek Philippe collection. Now moving on to the 5396. Now the 5396, like I said, even though it is a smaller case size than the 5205, it wears much larger. And that really is to do with the fact that the lugs splay so far out from the case on this watch, and they also don't curve down into your wrist. They actually really stick quite far out, and there's very little curve at all, in fact. So it does wear much larger because of that. But the case on this watch is absolutely so beautiful. It's got a much more of a modern feel about it versus the 5205. Those kind of curved edges feel much more of a classic feel, or create much more of a classic feel on the 5205. Whereas the 5396 has a very angular case. The bezel, for example, is very sharp around the edges and kind of in one block. The case underneath the mid part of the case midsection is also quite angular. You've got sharp edges. Yes, it has a flow and a circular flow about it, but it is much sharper, and the finishing is much sharper than that of the 5205. And something I said in my review about this watch is that it does create much more of a faceted effect, which allows the light really to shimmer off this watch in a different way than the 5205. The 5205 creates this sort of luster and glow that is really unique to a beautifully finished Patek Philippe, whereas the 5396 just has such an incredible sparkle about it. And for that reason, it has much more of a modern feel to it. It really depends on what you prefer and what you're looking from a watch. If you're younger, I'd say perhaps the 5396 might suit you better. But that's not to say that this is a modern looking dress watch, and the older people can't wear it. It is still incredibly beautiful and classic. And that's really, credit to Patek Philippe. They are always creating the most timeless classic watches possible. And that's why they're one of my favorite brands. Something that I want to comment on the cases between these two watches is actually the depth. The 5205 would appear much deeper than the 5396, when in fact the 5396 is only 0.2 of a millimeter thinner than the 5205. So very, very little difference. This really does change the way the watches wear on your wrist though. Definitely the larger lugs on the 5396 make this watch wear larger. But it makes it wear flatter because of that larger surface area plus the slightly thinner feel. and the flatter style of the case, the 5205 really has like a domed or bubble effect about it. It sits from your wrist quite proud, but definitely not too much so that you can't fit a dress scarf over it. It's thinner than a Rolex Daytona, so it is still quite a slim watch. It definitely feels much more of a smaller, compact timepiece than the 5396. Now moving on to the dials. The dials on these watches are totally different. They are obviously displaying the exact same information because they're both annual calendars, but they display it in totally different fashions. The 5396 is very reminiscent of the original mass production perpetual calendar wristwatch from 1940s, which is the 1526 reference from Patek Philippe. Similar way they displayed the month and the day there, and really the most identical to this 5396 is the 1960s 3449 reference, which is just a really beautiful watch. So they've kind of created a very classic looking dial on a very modern looking case here. I love the symmetry of the 5396 dial, maybe more so than the 5205. I love the simple elegance of the 5396. It just feels very spacious, and every detail is very thought out. It's perfectly symmetrical. The 5205 though is absolutely beautiful. I love the combination of the different circles on the dial and using those to display different information. One of my favorite things about the 5205 dial is the way that they've printed the Patek Philippe logo with Genève underneath. I much prefer that versus the separated version on the 5396, where there's the month and the day apertures in between. Both feature hand-applied markers, both in 18 karat gold, so one is rose gold obviously and white gold on these two models. They both feature a 24-hour hand, both, like I said, the same information, and they both feature moon phases with the different stars and the moons coloured in different tones to suit the actual watch. So all the attention to detail, as always, is exceptional and beautiful for Patek Philippe watches. Now actually onto the dial colour. They are both blue dials, but the dial colour is totally different on these two watches. I'd say there's maybe a little bit more green and warmth in the 5396 dial colour. It's also much lighter in colour than the 5205. The 5205 is a really beautiful sunburst effect where the colour is graduated as well. It's much lighter than in the centre than it is at the extremes of the watch. At the extremes of the watch, it's almost black. Just a totally beautiful dial, very, very elegant. And in some ways that makes this 5205 much smarter than the 5396. Because that 5396 is much of a brighter blue. It makes it in some ways a little bit more casual, and in some ways also a bit more limiting of when you can wear this. So in that respect, maybe I prefer the dial on the 5205. I like the fact that it's dark and makes that watch a bit more versatile. I also like the fact that that sunburst effect is more obvious on that watch. And when you get that watch in certain light, it really comes to life and looks absolutely incredible. In terms of setting the time and the annual calendar, these watches are almost identical. Very, very easy to set both of them. Again, very important that you set both of them to 6 AM before you adjust any of the annual calendar functions. Let's just have a quick discussion about actual colors of gold as well, briefly on these two watches. I think the white gold on the 5205 makes this watch perhaps a little bit more of a versatile watch. It's very much more understated than the 5396 in rose gold. That 5396 definitely is a dressy looking watch. It's much louder, that brighter blue dial as well. You definitely would see it more easily than you would the 5205. The 5205 is much more understated, under the radar, and for me, a watch that I would want to keep for a lifetime. Whereas the 5396 is perhaps a little bit more limiting. Definitely this one looks slightly younger than the other models. Overall, personally, I much prefer white gold, but it really depends on your preference. The black dial variation of this watch, the 5205 with the rose gold, is absolutely beautiful. One of my favorite watches from Patek. So either way, you can't go wrong with different colors of gold. It really depends on your preference and what you want to look for. One is slightly more understated and under the radar, and the other is just a little bit more special, a bit more of a special occasion timepiece. Something that always strikes me about Patek Philippe's really is the detail on the watch. There's just so much more detail than any other brand, really. There's some sort of special energy about a Patek that really, every time I put a Patek Philippe on, I just get that same sense of that energy, that real perfection and attention to detail and the care and the passion that's gone into this watch. It is a real different level to the Rolexes, the Breitlings, the Omegas, etc., etc. And of course, that is reflected in the difference in price point. So overall, which one do I prefer? I'd have to go for the 5205 if it was me choosing between these two watches. The reason being is I much prefer that slightly smaller feel in terms of case size, diameter, even though the 5396 is a smaller watch in terms of its diameter. The 5205 wears much smaller than that. Both are exceptionally beautiful when it comes to their case proportions and their case design. But for me, I just love the slightly more classic look of the 5205, even though the 5396 case is so beautiful and elegant. I just really like that, the kind of exceptional detail that goes or has gone into the 5205. This is one of the hardest decisions I have to make on a video for you guys, but yeah, you can't go wrong with either of these watches. They're both incredibly special. So comment down below which one you'd go for, the 5205 or the 5396. Let us know. Let us know if you choose maybe another annual calendar in the collection. And as always, if you're interested in either of these watches or any other watch in the Patek Philippe collection, then don't hesitate to contact us. Our details are in the description, and also at the end of this video, we'd be happy to call that watch into stock for you.